Hey there, world builders, dungeon masters, and writers and note takers of the internet. I am Siraxian of Atovia Plays, and welcome to my comprehensive beginner's guide for Obsidian. Now, I have just a couple of sort of starting remarks before we hop right into this. First, I will not be making a tutorial on installation or creation of a new vault. There are a lot of those already out there, and I will link to one that is very short and concise and simple and easy to understand in the description. Second, this video is intended to help you kind of build some knowledge about what's possible in Obsidian out of the box without plugins. Just you've created a new vault. This is what you've got. You can use it as a tutorial, as a reference, skip around, find whatever you need. There will be something here probably for most levels of Obsidian notes usage. I myself discovered many wonderful and kind of cool things just through the process of creating these tutorials. I put timestamps for everything, so I don't expect anyone to watch this whole thing. And in fact, you probably shouldn't watch the whole thing, as it will be quite long. Now, if you've got any questions about any of the content here, stuff that's not here maybe that you felt like was missing, or you want to hang out with some fellow world builders and other users of Obsidian, then come join us in the Atovia Discord. The first thing I want to talk about is what Obsidian is. If you're already familiar with the software, you can skip this section. But Obsidian.md, as the application is known, I will link the website in the description, is a local first note-taking application that sits on top of Markdown notes and operates on them. What is Markdown? Well, Markdown is a simple markup language that allows for easy readability and simple syntax that makes for a relatively easy way to format a document, and also leads to a document being easily translated over to things like HTML for websites, and publishing and things like that. Additionally, what do I mean by local first? Well, Obsidian, unlike other cloud-based platforms such as Notion or Google Docs, operates specifically firsthand on your hard drive on documents that are on your computer. This means that you don't have to worry about servers going down or internet access to be able to get at your notes, edit them, and do whatever you would like. Obviously, there are internet elements such as community-based plugins. The plugin scene is quite massive and is one of the biggest benefits of using Obsidian. And additionally, there are things like syncing up your notes across devices, of which there are multiple ways, and we will talk about later on in the series. One of the great things about it being local first, however, is that you don't have to use their provided syncing service. You could use GitHub instead, or a myriad of many other options that people like to use, such as Dropbox and things like that, to sync across all kinds of devices. I personally use Obsidian for a lot of things. My personal notes, tabletop role-playing games, world building. I catalog movies, books, television, recipes, journal entries, etc., etc. Remember that this guide will be comprehensive, and so we aren't going to start with some of the more obvious things that make Obsidian so powerful, such as winky linking. We will get to that later. First, we're going to start with just the basic formatting. What can we put inside of a Markdown note? Let's cover that first. The first thing I'd like to look at in regards to this is you will notice that I have here in front of me a default newly created vault. The only thing that I have changed is putting it to dark mode because I prefer dark mode on my applications. Just a quick thing before we start adding things to this new vault. There's a little icon up here in the top right, and you'll see that when I hover over it says current view, editing, and then I can click to read. When I click that, the way that the text is rendered changes slightly. This is because Obsidian slightly alters the way that it renders the text in a document based on which of these viewing modes you are in. This is sort of to help you when you're editing a document to understand the delineation between things like lines and such. And we'll see some of that more when we approach things like lists. I will try to, throughout the tutorial, to go and toggle back and forth through these two options so that you can get an idea of what a document will look like when you're just prepared to go back over it and study it and not change it. Additionally to these two modes, there is something called source mode. Source mode will show you the raw text of a document. You can see here that before, where this was rendered as italics, now we have two asterisks around it, which we will talk about later, but this is how we make text behave in different ways. Now, before we get started on actually typing something here, I'm going to clear this document and change it to Jerry. We'll be writing about Jerry today. Now, the first thing to cover with Markdown in its simplest aspect of formatting are paragraphs. Well, what is a paragraph? Well, this is a paragraph. Jerry was a nice guy. This is considered a paragraph, perhaps not in the traditional sense, but according to Markdown, once I have separated this with a new line, and I say Jerry was in fact a swell guy, now we have two paragraphs. Markdown delineates these by a single blank line between each paragraph, or block of text, as it would be more correctly said, I suppose. Now, the interesting thing here about the reading view is that, let's say I want Jerry was a nice guy and Jerry was in fact a swell guy to be separated by multiple lines. Well, if I ever switch back to reading view, these two are going to collapse up real close together. And in fact, that's exactly the same as if I only left one line. When Markdown is rendered, these lines are completely erased. They're collapsed together because that trailing white space is effectively useless if it was not intended by the user. However, if you'd like to add new lines, you could do so by simply adding the BR HTML tag. So you'll see actually, while I'm in editing mode, that these things render out quite nicely. And I can see them again if I go and hover. However, I want to see them at all times, I can switch to source mode, and this will show me, once again, the raw text. Then, switching back to reading mode, it looks just like I left it, which is very nice. And we will leave it for this way for now. Now, another thing that gets escaped and deleted, you could say, when rendered into reading view, is extra spaces. So let's say I make 3 spaces between Jerry was in fact a swell guy and Jerry was, let's say, the best of guys. Now, when I go to look at this in the reading view, my little extra space here, which I thought was very important, has been erased again. If I want this to stick around, I need to use some more HTML notation. I need to use specifically the non-breaking space character, which looks like this. Now, right now it looks a little bit ugly, but when I go back to reading view, you'll see that extra space is there now. Now, hopefully you don't have to use extra spaces too often, as it does look a little bit ugly when you're editing it, but thankfully when you're in reading mode, it looks just fine. Now, I've written some nice things about Jerry, but I kind of want to describe Jerry, and I want that to be in its own section. I think a good thing to use for this would be headings. So headings have 6 different sizes based on how many hashtags I put in front of the text I want to be a heading. This next section will be a major heading, as I want to describe Jerry very importantly. So we'll do 1 and call the heading description. Now, inside a description, there are maybe a bunch of aspects of Jerry I would like to describe, such as his appearance, which would be a smaller heading. And perhaps inside of appearance, I could even break this down into things like fashion sense and, well, I don't know, facial features. Let's say I break back out of this and I write another heading too, and this will be about Jerry's personality, quirks, and the like. So you'll see now, these are actually have little arrows next to them, and I can collapse them if I so choose. Because this is the highest level heading, you'll see everything gets collapsed under it. But let's say I was wanting to write about personality and appearance was sort of bothering me, having to scroll up and down if I had a lot of content here. So I can collapse this, and everything under appearance collapses, but personality does not, and I can go and I can edit this as I please. If you'd like to see how these sizes change, you can actually look at it change while you type these hashtags. And once you get past 6, it actually will just render it out as text, which in the reading view will just show as hashtags. You'll notice, of course, that the hashtags do not display when we're showing reading view. And once again, we'll switch back to source mode so you can see this is truly what our document looks like under the hood. So now let's talk about text formatting. This is kind of the more fun part. There are a number of little things that we can do to make our text in Obsidian more interesting. Let's say I wanted to bold some elements of this and italicize some elements of this to really like bring them out to the reader and to emphasize certain words. Jerry was in fact a swell guy. I want to bold in fact. So let's double click it to highlight it and then hit Control B. You'll see that when I do this, it wraps the word in 2 asterisks on either side. This is what tells Markdown that this section of text, a section of text between these 2 bracketing asterisk groups, should be bold. when rendered. So if I leave, you'll see that there's a little bit of a difference here. It's a little bit tough to notice at this size, but let's do something more interesting. Let's say I can even bold things in a heading. So heading bold, and you can notice the pretty stark difference here. And then let's also add the best of guys. It's not quite as V as fact, so let me italicize that. And to do that, you'll notice that I double clicked and then I press Control I. Now, I don't have to use shortcuts. I recommend you begin to learn them as you are learning the software, but I could also have gone here and then to the end of the word and I again. I'm sorry, my cursor was hovered over that. It was why it was purple. And notice that this is now italicized. Now I can actually mix these if I would like. I could make this whole section bold by adding 2 here, going to the end and adding 2 more. And so now best of guys is bolded and best and guys are also italicized. Now, just for fun, I'm going to highlight Jerry. To do this, I wrap him in equal signs like this. Now, Jerry is highlighted. That's cool. Now, what if I wanted to add a kind of footnote? Now, there are proper footnotes in Markdown, but for example's sake, let's say I wanted to put an asterisk here. Well, you'll see that it makes 2. Well, okay, I'll delete the second one, and I'll say, cool. And then at the bottom, I could say, oh, Jerry is very cool. Now you'll notice that it's trying to italicize everything after this because it thinks that I want this subset of text to be italicized. What do I do in this case? Well, I can escape any character that is a special character, such as an asterisk or an equal sign, or a number of other characters that do different things that we'll see later on, by putting a backslash in front of it. Now you're like, well, that doesn't look very nice, but when it renders, it'll look fine. As long as I don't have it selected, it'll show the asterisk. And if I go to reading view, you can see the asterisk as well is displayed nice and properly. You also notice there's a little bit of funkiness here, and this can usually be cleaned up just by going in and recognizing, oh, it looks like I ended up either deleting those or I might have Control Z those away. And now I can go back to reading view and everything looks great. This section will be a little weird still if I'm not more careful. Now the reading view recognizes there's no trailing asterisk, and so it will not italicize, but I want this to look good in all of my views. So let's go there. Let's also, of course, double check source mode again. Wow, this looks, kind of awful under the hood, but that's fine because the beauty of Markdown is it's still pretty readable, and I'm going to look at it like this most of the time. Just a couple other little formatting options that we have are things like strike throughs. So if I change my mind about Jerry being cool here, maybe when I put the asterisk on cool, I actually strike this through. So to do that, I put 2 tilde on either side, and this crosses it out. And we'll say Jerry is kind of cool. It's, things have changed since I started writing this note with Jerry. It's unfortunate, but it's true. And these are our biggest major pieces of text formatting at this sort of scale. Now there's some other types of formatting, of course, and we're going to talk about those next. Now we'll talk about lists, and I think we'll start by listing out some of Jerry's quirks. If I want to start a list, I can put either a dash or an asterisk by itself and then a space. And you'll see the moment I hit space, it auto creates this sort of nice looking unordered list with a dot. If I wanted to manage his quirks in a sort of hierarchy or rank them by number, I could do a 1 and a period and space, and this would start a numbered list. Whichever of these lists I decide to do doesn't really matter. I don't think we're going to be ranking his quirks, so for now we'll start with a regular list, and we'll say one of his quirks is he likes to chew his fingernails. It's a bit of a bad habit, but we'll call it a quirk for right now. Always looks over his left shoulder when called out to. Little things like this. Let's say that I add a quirk like doesn't like a lot of foods. Now, I might want to list what those foods are, but if I list them here, they're going to look like quirks. If I want to now indent the list and make sort of a sub list underneath doesn't like a lot of foods, all I have to do is hit tab. You'll see that Obsidian is handling a lot for me. When I press tab, it automatically is going to indent the dash for me. I don't have to go do that. If we look at this in source mode, you'll see that the dash has been indented. I didn't place this here. Obsidian is doing this for me behind the scenes, which is very nice of it. I appreciate it. Let's go out of source mode and back into here. He doesn't like zucchini. I don't think I spelled that right. We've got a spell checker plugged right in. This works offline. It's fantastic. You can even change the dictionary if you would like. We'll get into that in another part of the video. He doesn't like zucchini. And actually, you know what? I think we will change this list to a numbered list. And let's say he also doesn't like tomatoes. And perhaps he also isn't a big fan of pickles. And he especially doesn't like pickled chips. He probably thinks that's the worst thing ever. I love them, but you know, I can understand if you don't like pickles, you know, and why would you want them in chip form? So we've got a nice little list here. You also just notice in general that we can nest and we can internest both types of lists, unordered and ordered lists. There is one other kind of list that we can make that's quite useful at different times. Let's say Jerry has a to-do list. Let's actually call this Jerry's to-do list. We can create little to-do lists in Markdown and in Obsidian by placing a dash, hitting space like normal, and then placing a couple of brackets. Now, right now, I'm teaching you the explicit ways to do these things, but there are shortcuts and context menu ways of doing this on your own. So we just made a to-do list line, and I will show you in a second how to make that just with a right click and going through some menus. But let's say Jerry's to-do list is go to work, finish that one project at work, and let's say actually this is nest under work. Then we need a clock out after work is over. Then Jerry's got a date tonight at 6:30 p.m. Now, when he's done going to work, he can click this. Now, you might be wondering, how does Obsidian know whether or not a to-do list item is checked? Well, behind the scenes, if we go back to source mode, you'll see that it puts an X here, and I can put something here if I would like as well. And then if I go back to the reading view, it's checked. You can actually put anything in here. You could put a dash. You could put a P for complete. Not sure. So you could put whatever you would like there. Although in the reading view, it will cross it out. In the rendered view here, it will act a little finicky sometimes. I do recommend generally just using an X because that is what Obsidian is most comfortable with. Now let's talk about adding these things. Also, if I would like to leave the list, when I press enter one time, if I press it again, it just exits very nicely for me. I don't have to backspace several times. This will work for all list types. Often works for most things where you're trying to sort of exit the block, the current block of text. Now, let's say Jerry's grocery list. I want to make a new to-do list, but it's kind of, you know, maybe I don't want to type it out, or maybe I don't even remember quite how. We can right click and open up this context menu. Now there's some formatting options. I can bold, italicize, strike through, and highlight things. We'll get to these other ones down here in a moment. I can turn this line into a heading 1 through 6. I can make it just part of the body. I can even turn it into a quote. All lots of interesting things that we can talk about. But here's what we're looking for right here. I want to add another task list. And boom, it just auto inserts the start of a task list for me. Now, even more powerfully, let's say I had just started writing grocery list as just a bunch of different paragraphs separated by a line. So Jerry was looking for cucumbers and chicken breasts and he was looking for a sausage, and he was looking for some top ramen, but he was trying to be a little healthy, so he got some broccoli as well to complement the cucumbers. And then I'm like, well, I kind of want this to be a to-do list. If I highlight this group of text and I go in and I tell it what to do with this paragraph, I say, here, make these a task list. Boom. The whole thing is a task list already. It will even actually handle indentations before the list exists. So let's Control Z out of this, and let's say that a part of whatever he was going to use the chicken breast for, he needed some teriyaki sauce. And now I've sort of nested that underneath chicken breasts. And if I highlight the whole thing and I say I want this paragraph section to be a task list, boom, it's already nested for me. Now, I could also change this nesting if I wanted to just a regular list. Say, once I've got all the stuff for the chicken breast recipe, I just check this off. That is totally fine. I can do it that way if I would like. Now, let's say that I did want to add an empty line between pickle chips and something else under the quirks doesn't like a lot of foods section. If I hit enter, like we discussed before, I start a new line. And if I hit it again to go down one more, you'll see that it starts exiting my current block. It actually untabs out to the sort of previous layer of listing. And then if I hit it again, now I've just exited the list block entirely. So this is a bit of a pain. How do I get around this? Well, by default, Obsidian uses the enter key as your way to escape the block that you're in. And so it is nice in many ways that I could just hit enter several times and I'm out. I don't have to do anything weird of like clicking over here and let's say dropping this down and moving up. That's a little bit more of a pain, and I had done that in the past before I started to master this sort of Obsidian workflow. So let's say I wanted to add something else that's really similar to pickle chips, and I didn't really wanted to give it its own number. I want to sort of add it on here as an extra list. Now, I could do an embedded list, right? I could say, well, like lime chips, or they're too close to pickle chips for him. Jerry's a bit of a weird guy, but he's a cool guy, okay? Let's give him some grace. But I don't really like this. I kind of want it to be at the same indentation of pickle chips, but it's not the fifth place. So how do I do this? Well, to stay within the same block and still get a new line, I hold shift and press enter, and there we go. As easy as that. And now, when I press enter at the end of lime chips, I'm back in 5, and I can write some other new thing or food that Jerry does not like. Now, the last strange quirk of lists in Obsidian that I want to cover for you is that Obsidian is going to override your numbered list numbers. If I started zucchini, let's say I didn't know what Jerry's first and second least favorite food was. I'm going to start at 3 with zucchini. You see, the moment that I do that, Obsidian overrides the following numbers, ensuring that they are all numerically in order after the first number in the numbered list. Now, I could go and say, I wanted this to be 7. Well, unfortunately for you, Obsidian is going to change that. And there isn't a super clean way out of the box to make this happen, but you can escape the period. So, if I wanted, I could do this. And now I have a nice little out of ordered list that jumps a bit, 3, 4, 5, then 7 and 8. But you'll notice that it doesn't look as nice. Even in the reading view especially, it kind of looks, not so good because it's no longer, Markdown no longer sees it as a list. It no longer will render it as a list because I'm escaping one of the elements that makes it a list to the engine. And so we'll bring it back, and I guess for now we will just suffer through Obsidian's numbered list problem. There's not a whole lot we can do about that. Now, under personality, I've been thinking maybe we should quote something that Jerry has said before. If I want to write a quote, that's pretty easy. Let's start into this block underneath personality. I'm just going to create the greater than angle bracket. Now you'll see this little purple line appears on the side of it, and it's getting some interesting formatting done. And I'm going to press space. I want one space between this angle bracket and the text that I'm about to write. And let's say Jerry has said before, I wouldn't say I'm all that special. This is one of the reasons we like Jerry. You know, he's a humble fellow. And now, if I press enter twice and escape that, you'll see this is a nice little quote block. And if we go to the reading view, it looks quite nice. This is something that Jerry has said. Well, I kind of want to give him some credit for that. So underneath, I will place this and say Jerry. And maybe I give it I need to make sure that I'm continuing that quotation. And now in reading view, look at this little nice little quote block. You see, I've escaped the dash. Otherwise, it would appear as a list inside of this quotation once rendered, just like so. But I want it to look like attribution to Jerry as the originator of this quote. Now, let's say I want to write a little bit more about Jerry's personality, and I want to kind of visually distinguish that from the quote. And one way that I can do this, let's say I've written some more things about Jerry down here. Jerry, being a swell guy, is often quite well liked for his good humor and grace to others, let's say. Now I want these to be distinct from one another. So if I add 2 extra blank lines, and I go to the spot in the middle, and I add either 3 dashes or 3 asterisks, you could do either one. You'll see that they kind of like change for a second here. When I leave this, you'll see this nice little horizontal rule that gets placed in that on that line that I put those 3 dashes. This gives a nice little delineation between these two groups. And if I go to reading view, you'll see it looks wonderful. And as always, source mode. Um, Now, there's some interesting behavior with the horizontal rules. You can have the bottom line butt up against it. Now, in the reading view, it'll actually look the same as if there was an extra line here, because that is just the kind of spacing that it tends to give after the line when it's rendering for reading. But let's say I had typed something else after the quote. You'll notice it does some weird things to this right here. It actually looks like a heading. It's treating it as though it were a heading maybe of degree higher than 3. It's kind of hard to tell. Now, why is it doing this? Well, this is another way that Markdown uses to delineate an H2 header. So it's seeing this as if I had typed this. You'll notice those are the same size. If we go into here, the dashes go away, obviously. Reading view, right? Collapses that kind of stuff. We don't have to see it. And it treats it as a header too. Now, if we want to make sure that that's not happening, we just need to add 1 extra line. And don't worry, because in the reading view, this is always going to be this kind of, the spacing will be equivalent on either side. Now I'm going to delete this and just have our horizontal rule here. The next portion is going to be a bit more in line for people who are interested in using code blocks. If you don't think this is your kind of thing, feel free to skip forward. There are some things later in the series that are not programming oriented, but that do use code blocks, such as mermaid graphs. And so if you're interested in that kind of thing, or if you're ever interested in using data view, which turns your whole vault into a database, then I do recommend getting just the base fundamentals here that I'm going to provide you with on how these work. Now, what does Jerry do for a job? Well, let's say Jerry's a little bit like me, and Jerry's a programmer. And so maybe Jerry writes down some notes, or we write down some notes for Jerry about his job, and we want to write these notes like they're code. Well, one way we can do this is we can use a backtick, and then immediately we have an inline code block with no sort of like syntax highlighting or coloring or anything like that. Now, anything I type here is going to happily look like a piece of code. And so let's say he works for Microsoft. And you'll see the big difference, right, between these two lines. But what if I wanted to really truly write a chunk of code? Well, we type 3 backticks, and you'll notice that Obsidian auto-completes the other 3 for us. Now I can write a whole bunch of stuff in here. You'll notice actually that it captures my enter presses in a very nice manner. My presses are not trying to escape this block specifically because I want to be able to type and press enter whatever I would like in here, because otherwise it would be a little bit annoying to try and write out some test code or something like that. So I could do something really, really simple like console.log hello world, just a little piece of basic JavaScript. Um, and then when I leave, you'll see that this is formatted nicely. It even has a nice little copy button here. I can copy all the text inside of this and then paste it somewhere else if I would like. And in reading view, it looks very similar. You'll notice that there's a little bit difference in the padding kind of on the tops here than in this mode, where it kind of extends all the way up to the line above it. But those are pretty minuscule, and truly, if you get advanced at Obsidian, you can change that kind of thing down the line with CSS snippets, which we'll talk about in a later part of the videos. But I kind of want to see some highlighting here. If you're used to programming, it's a bit annoying when things like strings aren't highlighted green, perhaps, or some of my keywords are not highlighted. And I can do that by adding the type of language up here. Boom, I add JS. Now this highlights it and treats it as JavaScript. You'll actually see it even gives me the language in the little copy button over here. And if I go here, you'll notice it doesn't display the language when I'm in reading mode, only when you're in writing mode. Just a good little piece of information to have. Obsidian supports quite a few languages. They actually just use what's called Prism for syntax highlighting. And I will link Prism in the description, and you can look at all the supported languages. You have other things like Lua, and you could say, local thing, and you'll see the syntax highlighting is completely different now. Let's just make a little Lua table. And you could do C++, or C sharp, or even just some JSON. All of these things are supported, and you can always go and look up more. But that's all I'm going to talk about for code blocks now. We're going to see them prop up more in the future episodes and parts of this series. Now, we're going to talk about footnotes. Let's say I have a little bit of a... I'm kind of irked by the way this works, right? Because in reading view, I can see this, but now the content of my note falls past where I would scroll, and so I'm like, I don't know what that is. So I scroll down and I see, oh, okay, Jerry is kind of cool, sweet. But Markdown supports actual footnotes, which are quite nice actually. And let's use that instead. I want to use that instead because it'll do some cool things for me. So I'm gonna get rid of this, and I'm gonna go over here, and I will say caret 1. So this is telling it, look at this first footnote. And I'm going to convert this into that first footnote by typing the same thing and then a colon afterward. Now, it's not going to show up in writing view, but if I click reading view, it just gives us this nice little upper text that's highlighted like a link, and I can hover over it and it shows me the footnote. I don't have to scroll down or anything. And actually, if I click here, it'll go down and highlight it for me, which is fantastic. But there's also an easier way to do this a little bit. Let's say I didn't really want to type the one, the caret 1 bracket situation. That was kind of a little annoying to me. So I'm going to cut that, Control X, and I'm going to paste it like so. And I have to move, when I do it this way, I have to move the caret outside of the bracket. And you'll see that it once again formats it kind of nicely while I'm in writing view. You're like, oh, that doesn't look very nice, but don't worry. Like always, I go over to reading view and it's done some magic for me. It has automatically looked at that and said, oh, well, this is the first footnote that I see. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to convert it on the reading side to look like a proper footnote. And I could actually go here and I could also say, let's see, we are pretty sure this is the same Jerry. Once again, doesn't look nice in editing view, but that's okay. That's not what it's for. I go to reading view. Look, it knows that it was the second one as well. And so it auto-populates that for us. And it looks great. And it's a little bit easier to do. Just a nice little quality of life way of writing these footnotes, and also helps because you don't have to keep track of the number. I've had big documents before where I had a lot of footnotes, and it can be a pain to have to move the numbers around. If you add a footnote in between 19 and 20, well then, like, and you have 30, you have to you have to adjust every footnote after that. And so this is a nice way to not have to deal with the numbers and let Obsidian kind of handle that for you. Now, I also want to add some stuff about Jerry's personality, but I don't want it to show up in the reading view. If I want to write something here in the document that I don't want to display when I am actually reading it, then I can do that by typing two percentage symbols and writing whatever I would like in between them. I usually like to have them sort of wrap like this. So anything put in here is going to be a comment. So side note, Jerry is quite humble, but sometimes too humble. You see that it shows these all the time when I'm in editing view, actually. Unlike some of the other formatting that it will escape away when I'm not actively looking at it, it always kind of shows the comments percentage symbols. But when I go to reading view, completely gone. This is sort of like a for my eyes only kind of thing almost, or only when you're editing the document, I want to see some of this stuff. This could be a good way of leaving yourself some information or some notes about maybe what you want to change or the like, but then still being able to kind of scrub that information away when you want to read the thing that you're working on. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about in this video is properly discuss how to escape all of the different formatting syntax. You will have noticed that early on in the video, we escaped an asterisk by a backslash and an asterisk like so, which leaves us with just an asterisk instead of a weird problem where it's trying to italicize something in the editing view. Now, this is how you can escape any of the special characters. If I wanted to type ASDF surrounded by underscores and it not be italicized, then I can do this, and it will escape those nicely. Anything at all. Let's say fashion sense. I wasn't really wanting this to be a heading, so I just escape it like that. And now fashion sense has some hashtags in front of it, which probably wouldn't want that normally, but you get the idea. If I wanted to type out an actual hashtag, let's say I did something like this: hashtag beautiful. Well, you'll notice something weird's happened here. This is something called a tag. We'll talk about this later. This is a way of marking and identifying notes with some different information. But I didn't want to do that to the note. I wanted this to just be a hashtag, a silly little thing. And so I can backslash escape the hash, and boom, it looks wonderful. And if I go to my reading view, everything looks great. So that's part one of the comprehensive beginner's guide to Obsidian. If you feel like I've left anything out for some of these different themes, or you have questions about any of the stuff I've covered here, please ask in the comments or come join us in the Discord, which is linked in the description, and ask me there, and we can chat it up about this awesome software. Part two will hopefully be coming out very soon. It'll be all about links, images, attachments, and that sort of thing. Thanks so much for watching. If you want to see more of this kind of thing, like, subscribe, click the bell. I don't know how much of that is actually useful, but anything that you're inclined to do. I also share daily world building videos in shorts on this YouTube channel as well. And if you're interested in that kind of thing, go over there and give them a view if you would like. But as always, thanks for watching.